So welcome everyone to Becoming a Thought Leader in Research Administration and Compliance. My name is Heather Zeman. I am the events manager here at the CUNY School of Professional Studies, and it is such a pleasure to have you all joining us today. We have a really great event for you today. Before we get started with our main presentation, I do just want to go through a couple quick housekeeping items. So first, if you do have questions during today's presentation, please submit your questions using the Q&A feature that's located at the bottom of your Zoom screen. We will have a dedicated Q&A period following Professor Casey's main presentation, and we will only be answering questions that are submitted through that Q&A portal. So please do take a moment, look for that icon at the base of your Zoom screen. It's usually it looks like two little conversational messages with a Q&A underneath that. If you don't find that, or if you have any other sort of technical issues throughout the webinar, if, for instance, you can't hear Professor Casey, please do let us know that in the chat, and I will work with you, or Samantha will work with you to troubleshoot. So now, without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce tonight's speaker. So James Casey is one of the founding professors of the CUNY SPS Master's Degree in Research Administration and Compliance. And as one of the program's academic leaders, Professor Casey brings over 30 years of professional experience in research management and administration, as well as over 20 years of undergraduate and graduate teaching. In addition to his work at CUNY SPS, Professor Casey currently negotiates research agreements for Florida State University and consults in the areas of data protection and privacy. And as if that's not enough, he is also licensed to practice law before the US Supreme Court and the state of Wisconsin. So Professor Casey, we are just thrilled to have you here today, especially knowing that you must have such a packed schedule. So we welcome you to take it away and share your thoughts with us.
Okay, Heather, thank you for the introduction. Good evening to everyone, wherever you may be. I'm down here in San Antonio, Texas. It's a pleasure to talk to you tonight about the idea of being a thought leader in research management and administration. And what I like to think about is that tonight will be more of a discussion and hopefully get you thinking about your own journeys in research administration. You know, I'm going to share with you what I've gone through and what I've experienced in my career. Before I got into research administration, I practiced law and worked in local government grant administration. And working at the local government level, managing grants gave me the great leap into university research administration. But while I will talk about my journey, really, I also want you to think about what I talk about and how that applies to you. You know, I see that some of my past and present RAC 600 students are on this call tonight. And what I've said to them over the years is that, you know, I want you to become a thinker in research administration. I don't want you to be a bureaucrat. And there is a big difference in being, you know, by the numbers, by the book, looking just at the four corners, and that's it. And I was never like that early in my career, and that those thoughts have never left me to this date. So really, this is to prompt your own thinking about where you want to go in the field of research administration, and then to become a thought leader, because really we do need those. And you know, it wasn't until the last few years when people were inviting me to speak and that sort of thing. You know, they'd say, you're a thought leader in the field. And I'm like, you know, what does that mean? I mean, I certainly don't look for it. I simply just do my job and move forward. And looking back is good, but looking forward is even better. And so really what I want you to think about is, where do you want to go after this session tonight? not only in your classes in the CUNY program, but where do you want to go professionally in the associations, whether you're a member of NCURA or SRA, if you're a member of IRMA in Europe, where do you want to go with your career? And so this is really the start of a conversation. This is not going to be me telling you you need to do A, B, C, and D, and then you become a thought leader. That's not what this is about. But it's really to help you with some ideas that may prompt you, may help you in your day job, but it will help you going forward in your career. So this slide, you can see kind of the agenda for tonight. The second, third, and fourth bullet points are really the themes of each of the slides. And these have been guiding principles for me for my entire career, particularly the one that says reasons to say yes and not reasons to say no. And, lawyers get a bad rap, some of it deserved, some of it not. But, I work with lawyers all the time, both at FSU and in my other consulting and in professional, contexts. And, lawyers have a reputation for finding reasons to say no, not yes. And my opinion has always been, yes, you want to reduce compliance issues and legal exposure, but in many cases, you'll never be able to eliminate it. You may be able to mitigate it. And this is certainly in the context if you're doing any work with international grants or international project management. So I know the phrase finding reasons to say yes, not no, has been widely received by during interviews that led to me being hired at different institutions in my career as I went up the pole, let's say, in the profession. So that is a very challenging balancing act of facilitating research, bringing in more money at your institution, but also make sure you are compliant. And it's rather interesting because as a lawyer, I'm not practicing law in the field, but I'm still licensed. And unlike a research administrator without a law degree and a bar license, I can be disciplined by the Wisconsin Supreme Court for something I may do when I'm not even practicing law. I could be working at a university and did something, let's say steal money, okay? And not that I have, but you get the idea. If you work at an institution, and I've known a couple cases where people have stolen money from departments, those people generally, well, they'll get fired, but in many cases, they won't be charged. They'll just have to go away. And I do remember one case years ago where someone who was caught taking money out of a department petty cash drawer at one university, a few months later showed up at another university 1,000 miles away. Well, if you're a lawyer, you won't get away with that. But in many cases in higher education, bad actors often just disappear and then they show up at another institution a few months later. So, that goes to what another point kind of for tonight is to protect your own reputations. And I will tell you that being a lawyer it's always been in my mind, and you can hear it in public discourse. Not only are there actual impropriety in the workforce, but there's appearances of impropriety. And that idea of it just looking bad is something, that should constrain all of us in our work environments, whether or not you're a lawyer. But for someone with my background, I've always had those thoughts in the back of my head of being, not only a great employee, but highly ethical. And that should be part of the way you think about being a thought leader too. And we'll cover more as I go through these slides. So what does being a thought leader mean? Well, I did recently see an article from last year in Forbes magazine that was talking about what is being a thought leader all about. And you got the web link here, but clearly you can see it's more than just industry recognition or monetizing your knowledge, which is kind of a reference to leaving a job in an organization and then going out and being a consultant in your own practice. But more importantly, it is important about being authentic, empowering, and bringing alternate views and insights to the table. So really that gets to what I say at the bottom. What is your secret sauce? Look inside yourself, be honest, dig deep, and think about the extras you bring to the table. By that, I mean in the field of research administration, in your office context where you work right now, but also, in your professional association activities. I would say that, however you define thought leader as you go through your career, it will, in almost every case, require you to be active in your professional association. You can be a thought leader on your campus, that's fine. But if you want a higher impact in the profession or in the field of research administration, you want to get involved at the regional or national level, whether that's in SRA or NCURA or what have you. But this is what being a thought leader is all about: authentic, empowering, and bringing new insights to your context. And that's kind of where, I think about, how can we make the profession better? And what can you bring and what thoughts can you add that nobody has thought of? And believe me, that is actually happens more than you realize it. And so, it's kind of interesting because I never thought of the idea of a secret sauce until I was listening to a webinar recently by blues rock guitarist Billy Gibbons. So if you know the band ZZ Top, Billy is the lead singer and guitarist. And Billy talks a lot about, the intellectual side of playing electric guitar. And then he talked about his secret sauce that he brings to performance. And then I thought, that's a great idea. I don't think we ever really think about it. I mean, we're, in the modern working world, we're talking about, what's your brand? How are you branding yourself in research administration? That sort of thing. But then I thought secret sauce is rather more intriguing than just branding yourself. So, the idea of what is unique in your case and what you can articulate it in your 5-minute elevator pitch. You can articulate it in an interview, but you probably should think about it. And I will tell you, for me, my secret sauce was always the ability to mix the legal and the administrative side of research with a goal of facilitating growth, okay? And being open to every possibility. And that brings in the idea of flexibility too, which will come out a little bit later. So, my secret sauce was saying in an interview context or otherwise, hey, I'm a lawyer. Yes, I have practiced law. Yes, I have been a trial lawyer. And quite honestly, I think I'd be better now at this age than I was at 28. But, I'd be like, this is where, I can add all of the great attributes of going to law school or being an attorney, bringing it into the higher education context and supporting research in a productive way forward. And, that by and large has worked pretty well. the only issue I've always seen is that a lot of faculty on campuses would would start calling me, we go to meetings with industry partners or whatever, and they would say something like, "Oh, this is Jim Casey, he's my lawyer." And I'm like, "No, no, no. I'm not your lawyer. I'm a whatever my role was at the time, because I'm not practicing law as a general counsel in an institution. I have the knowledge, and certainly at this point in my career, I am more interested in mentoring research attorneys to find that balance of straddling between a general counsel's office and the research office. But I never hold myself out to being a lawyer at any university I've worked at. But that has been part of my secret sauce. And to be honest, I think the other part that I have not changed a bit in this thinking from when I was 30 to when I'm now. And but it's always learning more. And so, if you follow me on like LinkedIn, you'll often notice I use the hashtag lifelong learning. And that is something that I constantly mention to research administrators, students in my RAC 600 class, because we can never stop learning. It doesn't matter if you've been in the field 1 year, 15 years, or 30 years. Everybody is learning more all the time. And as all you know, I'm kind of preaching to the choir that, research and technology and science and everything that you do in your research offices is constantly changing. And there's no way around it. And in the last 5 to 7 years, I really, looking at my career, I thought, well, I need to grow a little bit more. And that's when I started getting into data protection. The EU GDPR was coming out in 2018. So this would have been 2017. And I'm like, well, I don't want to be a mainline compliance person. Although I guess I'd call myself a generalist. But that's where I wanted to build a new specialty. And so that, I think, is important to think as you get older and progress in your career. You want to take a look at, it's like a rolling stone gathering moss. What's your next thing you want to accumulate in your skill set? And so that's the way I've always been. And that is not anything, my hair may be grayer, but all those thoughts are still the same. This is kind of this theme of getting from point A to point B is, I guess, from going from being a productive, excellent team player in your office to being a thought leader. How can you get from where you are to where you want to be? And as I say it to students in RAC 600, it comes out in many conference proceedings, NCURA, SRA, and IRMA, and that is good. But I'll say, doing what the job description says is fine. And I will say many former colleagues at other institutions, that was their mission. Just look at the job description, make sure you do your job, you meet the job description, you get a decent raise, or, well, in some years, no raises. But, you kind of are looking at the four corners of a document. And I've always said, and once again, this is no different than when I started in the field 30 years ago. What's beyond the four corners of the job description they gave you at hiring? And, so for me, I can remember in the late 90s taking the OMB circulars home. And if you're old enough, you will know that there were A110, A21, and a third one, A133. And those, of course, were all collapsed into the uniform guidance somewhere around the year 2012, 2013. But, one weekend I thought, you know what? some of this stuff I don't have to deal with as a pre-award team leader, but I still want to learn. So I took the circulars home and I actually read them over a period of time. And I know when I mention this to colleagues in my office, they look like you're pretty strange to do this on your weekend, but it's like an investment in the future. And that's what I think about all this idea of lifelong learning. It's an investment in your future. So I've always, in my work ethic, but I would suggest to all of you tonight that, just doing what the job description requires, that's fine. A lot of people do that, and if they don't get promoted, they wonder why. That's their business. I don't fault anybody for doing their job and then going home. But if you want to go beyond that, and if you want to become a thought leader in the profession, you want to do more than just what is on the four corners of your documents. And what I say near the bottom is it's important to do research. And what I mean by that is in your work environment, you may not get the right answer from your colleagues in the office. You may not get the right answer from looking at a website really quickly or Googling something. Sometimes you have to dig a little deeper. And that is something that research administrators should do. Go beyond the easy, tried and true locations of knowledge, and you may have to do a little more substantive depth research on the internet. But once again, that goes to like a mindset of going beyond what is minimally required to have a good job and to keep your job and get a raise and that sort of thing. So, I think one of the things I would posit to you tonight is, whatever your goals are, and maybe you don't want to become a thought leader, but if you do want to go down that route and become, very successful professionally in the profession, in one of the associations, you're going to have to do a little bit more than is required. You're going to have to present more. You're going to have to write articles. I've done more than enough of that stuff in my professional career, and I do some yet today. But some of us get to the point where some of the younger generation under me need to do some of that too now. And so, that's why a lot of what I do now is mentoring. And I am a mentor in the IRMA inaugural mentoring pilot program. We started that in the spring. It goes for 1 year. I was lucky. I was the only American chosen to be in the IRMA mentoring pilot program. A lot of my IRMA colleagues were selected as mentors. And it's been a fantastic experience. My mentee works at the University of Luxembourg in Luxembourg. And, it's for those of us that are now at the point in our careers where we want to mentor, one of the more interesting aspects of that is looking at it's not just the gender differences in research administration, but it's also the age differences between the mentors and the mentees in most cases. And I personally like to learn from younger research administrators, because I don't have the answers to everything all the time. I'm constantly learning. I certainly know my strong points, but I know areas that I constantly have to improve upon. And that is why mentoring is so important. And I'm sure everybody on this webinar knows about that. It's been around for a number of years, but it's certainly big in the professional societies we all belong to. So, getting to the point of being a mentor kind of is tied in a way to being a thought leader too. Because I think a good part of mentoring is not just, if the mentee has a question for me, it's not always necessarily that I'm just going to give the answer and that's the end of the discussion. I would almost do like a Socratic law school method of questioning. Like, okay, this is the question you have. How do you think you'd like to work through it? Then we'd have a conversation. That may lead her to ask me another question or ask me to explain something. Or I may ask her another question. And that's where these mentoring can be a very excellent discussion between the mentor and the mentee. And I think in her case, she's making great progress in this idea of what you'd call thought leadership in the field. And so I'm going to move to the next slide. Another excuse me, another topic that has always been certainly once I got to the management level was the concept of adding value. This is adding value to your institution and to your profession. So how can you add value to research administration operations in your office? Okay. Once again, some people won't think about that, figuring it's the associate director or the director's responsibility or the AVP's responsibility. And that's true too. But you can distinguish yourself by thinking about that value beyond what currently exists. And you can show your supervisor what added value you bring to the team. And this goes beyond the idea of a service mindset. And believe me, I've been, listening to service suggestions for 30 years. And I've always balanced the expectation of providing great service to the faculty with the realities that sponsored research money is other people's money, whether that is US government money, which is taxpayer money, or whether it's money from a foundation or a private company. Once again, it's that whole idea of balancing the yes and the no, the facilitation and the compliance. And those are ideas that will never go away. I don't care how much technology we put in place. I don't care if we are using AI to write grant applications. It doesn't matter because those balances still need to be done by human beings. So, what part of being, in your growth of going to a next level, to being a thought leader, is something I'd call boundary spanning. And maybe you've heard of the phrase, it's used a lot in MBA programs, but it's basically you taking a look at what's going on in the profession. What are the hot topics? This is where going to conferences is so important, to network and to listen to the new ideas bubbling up in the field or bubbling down from the sponsors or the funders. And then thinking of boundary spanning in terms of crossing boundaries into other fields. Now, for me, I was trained as a lawyer, so I naturally gravitate immediately to thinking about sponsored research. And then what are the legal implications? That's just the way it's been for me. But I also know that I do look to grow beyond my own thought processes and what I do know, and last weekend when I was at the GWIPR meeting in Washington, which is GWIPR is the Government University Industry Philanthropy Roundtable, which is part of the National Academies. I was talking to a colleague out there who is from Turkey, and we were having a coffee, and I was explaining some science material. And she's like, how do you know about all this these scientific concepts when your background is in law or political science? And I said, I just picked it up over 30 years. I worked at major research universities. I worked at PUIs. I've worked at master's levels. And at every level, you can always learn what the faculty are doing by just doing it with them. And so, you know, for me, that is what boundary spanning was. I am not a scientist, I'm not an engineer, but I have picked up just enough important concepts in many of those areas that I can talk in public and not, sound misinformed. And so that's, for me, that's been one of the great benefits of working in research administration in my career, is working with very smart people, working in fascinating growth areas. And I know there's some people on this webinar today who I'm sure have the same experience if they've been in the field for any amount of time, and they know what I'm talking about. And so it's not new to them, but it could be new to others. And that's one of the benefits of being in research administration, is just being a sponge. And I've always looked at myself as being a sponge in the profession. Um, and like I said earlier, rolling stone gathering moss. I think that is what I did over my career to help get me to where I am, or having the flexibility to do what I want when I want. The last bullet point is very important: advocating for the future now. And what I mean by that is, some people look at the future and say, okay. Some people look at the future and say, well, that's fine, but how can we implement it? And I think that's probably one of the real exciting aspects of research administration. And one of the great benefits to working in, to be part of professional associations, is to hear about the new, hot areas that are coming down the pipe. And, certainly 7 years ago in the United States, it was data protection because of the EU GDPR. There was a rash of privacy breaches. Maybe if some of you have had your social security number or credit card number stolen, or the stealing of student data at universities. So data protection and privacy became hot topics. And I thank the Europeans for pushing the GDPR, because even now in the United States, we don't have an overarching federal data protection law, and nothing's going to happen before a new Congress comes in place in January anyway. So you have these new areas. And then if you are a member of these professional associations and you go to conferences, there's another new topic: research security. And Cura's doing it, IRMA's been doing it for the last year. Research security, that was part of our discussions at the National Academies last week. That is a new hot area. And of course, you have an old standby like cybersecurity, which has been around at least 20 years. And that's never going away. And then you have artificial intelligence, which of course everybody's talking about. And, there's tons of articles on the subject matter. Every professional association is doing it. My lawyer colleagues in the State Bar and in the American Bar Association are having, conferences on these topics. And so these are the areas that 15 years ago, none of us were really thinking of. I mean, maybe a little of cybersecurity, but that was really more for the engineers and the computer scientists on campus. So it's an exciting time for you to learn a lot. And I think that's the important point. You may have graduate degrees but we still need to learn more. And, the CUNY program is excellent because it gives you in-depth training on the changing nature of research administration. And so for all of you that are in the program, this is great. Some of you are alumni, and welcome back. I know we probably have a couple people on the line that are looking at enrolling in the CUNY program. But, as one of the founding faculty in the program, I can say, you're going to get the tools you need to grow in the future. But there is much to be said for having a work ethic mindset where you're constantly making yourself better. Um, it's interesting because in my professional career, um, every school I worked at, they would pay for one membership, like Encura. Okay. So, really for the last, 30 years, I've been paying my state bar membership out of my own pocket. Although I'm not practicing law, my license is active, but I've had to pay for that because, school's not going to pay for that on top of Encure membership. So, and I've had these conversations with students in the program or with, Encura colleagues or IRMA colleagues, and they unfortunately are at institutions where they don't even pay for one membership. And I said, you know what, I don't want to say this, but I feel compelled to say it. If your institution will not pay for your Encure membership for a year, pay for it out of your own pocket. It's like 185 bucks or something, which is like the cost of 4 Starbucks lattes these days. But the point being, whether you have an SRA or an Encure membership, and even if you have to pay out of pocket for a year, if you use those resources religiously, those memberships are worth much more than what you're paying out of pocket. So yes, there were a couple of years when budgets got tight at universities, and we had to cut back. And I was not above not paying for it. I looked at it as an investment into my future. So that's something to think about too. The third theme of tonight really is find reasons to say yes, not reasons to say no. I think, as I've said in other contexts on this discussion, this is really a balancing question. And it's a balance between facilitation and compliance. And the bullet point, the fourth bullet point on communication. And this is something I talk about every week in the RAC 600. Some of our discussion always comes back to communication. It's while as a manager, I would want the staff to be correct in their technical ability. As a research administrator, what was even more important was how you said it to the faculty, whether it was in person. What was the tone of your voice? What's the nuance in the message you're giving out there? And so this is where communication is really critical. I was at Northwestern University when you had really the widespread use of the internet. And back at that time, many faculty on campus did not want an email address. They were afraid they were going to get too many emails and it would bog them down. But at some point, the president of the university had to issue a memo telling all the faculty, you will have an email account. All official university communication will go to that email. Ignore it at your own risk. Well, about a year later, people begrudgingly were okay, with email. But then you had the next problem in the late 90s, which is the inappropriate use of email, the inappropriate communications on email. And as recently as 7 years ago at another institution, I brought in someone to run a class on how to write appropriate emails in different contexts. But in the late 90s, no one really had experience with email. And I think if you go back and look at emails from that time period, if you save any of them, you'd be shocked at what some people just put in the emails. It was like they were in the office next to you and there was no filter. And I think, we have come many, many ways from those days. But the idea of being appropriate in tone, substance, and how you pass yourself off as is something that is always important. And as I say in the last two bullet points, it is easy to lose faculty cooperation. It's easy to lose faculty respect, and it's hard to regain it. And every school I worked at, I at the director level and above, the faculty would complain about issues from 9 years ago, and the faculty were gone. Maybe the administrators that were in my position had moved on, and whatever. But the memories were long for something that may, there's always more to this than one side of the story. But I would always listen to that, but I'd say, okay, how can we get past these feelings of what happened with my office 10 years ago? And then that was putting it on a constructive track to the future. And that's how I'd say that is when you can find reasons to say yes, not reasons to say no. And when I have the phrase at the top of the slide, don't get the impression that I would ever countenance illegal behavior. I never do. This does not mean that you break rules or regulations or the uniform guidance or federal law or state law. That has nothing to do with that. This has to do with finding that right sweet spot between building and complying. And every vice president for research, every university president wants to grow research or sponsor projects in general, since research is more than just technical research projects. You can get a lot of grants in, service areas and that sort of thing. So really, it's all in your context specific. Okay, so keep that in mind. And really having a positive disposition in the workplace is critical in working with the faculty, especially because you don't want, and I can't tell you how many times I've had situations that were small little things, and then a staff member in the office sent a snotty email or a derogatory email to a faculty member, and then 5 hours later I'm getting a call from the vice president for research because the faculty member forwarded the email to the VP, or worse yet, and I've seen that, the emails went to the university president, then it drifts down to the VP, then drifts down to me, and I have to deal with it. So this is the important thing of how important communication is. And while we rely on so much technology now to communicate, having that sort of mindfulness is critically important. So really, before we go to the question and answer session, I just want to close out here with a few thoughts. Your personal work ethic is really the start and not the end of where you go in research administration. Many, unlike when I started in the profession, there's many no cost training items on the internet. When I joined the profession, it was all hard copy. And to get the hard copy stuff, you either had to have a subscription or you had to go to the conferences. So now, there's so much out there, videos, and a lot of it doesn't even require budgetary outlay. So there really is a way, and I often recommend the NCURA YouTube Tuesdays on YouTube, which and NCURA's handle is NCURA 1959. That's many great, and you don't even need to be a member of Encura to access those. That's out in the public domain. So there's a lot of resources out there that didn't even exist 15, 20 years ago. I go back to the early discussion today and say, what is your secret sauce as a research manager administrator? What differentiates you among a large group and increasingly growing group of research administrators, both in the United States and abroad, especially since working remotely and working hybrid have become very common. And I think even with the ending of the pandemic, there's still a lot of job opportunities where hybrid or remote working are available. I mentioned earlier, the evergreen topics are those that we refer to as being topics that never go away. They will always be with you. That is, what value can you contribute to your office? What value can you contribute to your profession? How can you say yes rather than no? How can you communicate that yes in a very friendly, encouraging way to the faculty or other administrators? And how is your communication transmitted? And I will say on that point, and it's a rule of thumb, and I'm kind of really glad because one of my AVP colleagues at Florida State has the same opinion I do, which is if you're staff and you're going back and forth with a faculty member on an issue, if you can't solve the problem in 2 sets of email exchanges, the staff member in the research office should pick up the phone and call the faculty member or schedule a visit to the faculty member's office, which I always love to do. Now, I know I have worked with people in the past that never wanted to visit faculty, don't like talking on the phone. And that is not my style, but I'm not sure those sort of styles are really the best either. So keep that in mind. Probably the last thought, and I say this to my students in every class, don't sound like a bureaucrat. Okay, don't just rely on saying, well, you're wrong, faculty member X, because uniform guidance sections blah 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 says it's not permissible. Well, that will turn off some faculty, no doubt. So you don't want to sound overly legalistic, and you don't want to sound like a bureaucrat that likes to say no rather than yes. And I have worked enough in establishing grants offices in my career or re-engineering them, is that putting some of these communication and cultural guideposts in place so that the 6 months on, the faculty will say, Jim, you're doing a great job, because the culture is so different in your office than it was under your predecessor. That's some of the best compliments I've ever received, because, if you're starting an office or re-engineering an office, that's going to take a few months to turn the ship around. But when you're turning the ship around, one of the low-hanging fruits is better communication and face-to-face meeting with the faculty if you can. And I always love to get out of the office and walk on campus. But I know some people didn't. But when I'm in a managerial capacity, I do require it, unless it's a fully remote position. So these are, like I say, what I want to do tonight, we'll go into the Q&A and discussion now. But what I want to do is to throw 3 themes out at you, get you thinking about where you want to go. Some of this you may love, some of it you may think, it's not for me. That's fine. There's no right answer on this. But like I say, if you're in the field for the long haul, you want to think about these things, and none of us are getting any younger, so you you want to think about where you want to take your career over the short term and the long term. So we'll turn it over now to Q&A and a discussion, and happy to talk to you.